Okay, we are recording now.
So, good. Welcome, colleagues and friends. For who doesn't know, my name is Mike van Winkel, based in the Netherlands. I've been an independent consultant for more than 15 years, Dutch citizen, a mechanical engineering background. I have recently completed a master study as the first external contract student at the Faculty of Military Sciences at the Netherlands Defense Academy. So that's I'm very proud of, and the first ever, so let's say civilian and also not employed by defense in the Netherlands. So that's really great. I dare to say, to conjecture that I'm one of the people on the planet who is a frequent user, or maybe one of the most frequent users of Stafford's triple index model for performance measurement, which I use a lot with clients in the processing industry. I analyze processing plants' performance. I also build simulation models to predict performance in future. I have also done some social entrepreneurship. I've done, Jens, I think, is aware of that, in collaboration with Malik. I've done a youngsters project in the Netherlands for over a decade with thousands of pupils in secondary schools using the eco-policy simulation to advise policymakers and stakeholders on attractiveness of my home region. Recently, I have co-founded a non-profit in Belgium, focused on human rights-based policies in the EU for safe, orderly, and regular migration issues, together with my partner, based in Brussels. And it's an interesting process because I'm also introducing her to cybernetics. I've been in cybernetics circles for all my professional career, so that's a good start. So I'm also disseminating that to my partner, and through that process and introducing integration, teams integrity, I also myself revisited Beyond Dispute and looked a bit at, let's say, the mathematical part of Beyond Dispute, and came up with a, as the subtitle says, a new spectral analysis of the icosahedral graph, which basically predicts the performance or how fast it reverberates over iterations. And I came to the conclusion that the critic role, which plays a critic role in integration, was not included in the convergence model. So I updated that, and those results I would like to share with you today. So I think I've just gave you the problem statement. I will walk through some rather more or less technical aspects of the updated model, some simulation results, conclusions. I would like to debate with you on future research options for more empirical analysis. And maybe at the end, not so unimportant to maybe if we want to proceed, because this is a research group linked to Metaforum on Teams integrity, to maybe look into if we want to continue the conversation on Slack, which is, let's say, the conversation platform for Metaforum. So before we delve into the technical aspects, the overview is basically the convergence model, which I refer to, simply predicts the performance of the icosahedral integration, as it was then in 1994, proposed by Stafford and Jalali in Beyond Dispute. I've updated the icosahedral graph with the internal critic braces, which were not there, as I say. To compute the convergence, I've taken another model, Markov chains, which I think is more appropriate for looking at the performance rating of this integration in the icosahedral graph over the adjacency matrix that Stafford used and also Jalali. With that, I was able to do Monte Carlo simulations, so look at some of the stochastic behavior in hypothetical integrations over iterations. And basically what that model does is look, what is the probability of transferring information from one node, from one topic to the other. And as we know, there are 12 topics. And the hypothesis is that after 3 iterations, it shouldn't matter where you are in this integration anymore. You should get all the information as it is updated in icosahedral space. While looking at the results, I can demonstrate to you that the critics add 21.5% of nominal performance, that's the average performance, over 3 iterations of integration. And the convergence increases after 3 iterations to 98.9%. That's quite high, and that's 7.8% higher than what Stafford predicted using the adjacency matrix in the book. I will briefly show you the graphs taken from the book, but that was 91.1%. And so I would say that integration actually performs better in practice than it was theorized in the book. As this is a nice feature of integration, my proposal or my invitation would be to look at future research to also empirically test and validate if this actually happens and if that's feasible. I think that would be good to speak about in terms of future research or options. So, how did I arrive at the 98.9%? And how important those critics are in the protocol. For those of you who are not that familiar with the protocol, I've just taken 2 diagrams from Malik, courtesy for Malik in St. Gallen, to sort of visualize where the critics are vis-a-vis the members. So in the left-hand side diagram, you have one. Let me see if I can even use the laser. Yes, so you have one topic which is discussed by 5 members, and the edges or struts they occupy are colored in orange. And at the same time, or on the outer ring of such an outcome resolved meeting, on the right-hand side, you have the ring of critics, also indicated in orange. And well, I actually even didn't visualize what is added in this new convergence model, but that's basically the internal relations or braces, tensile componentry, as Stafford called it, from these nodes to the node being discussed. So that was the question, how important are these internal relations? Let's see. So, referring to the book, updating it using Markov chains. On the left-hand side, you see what Stafford presented in a graph, and that was based on, again, on the adjacency matrix, which is just a 12 by 12 matrix saying which node is connected to which other node in the icosahedral graph, using computing eigenvalues, which sort of describe the dynamic behavior over iterations, how fast does it converge, or in his terms, how fast and what percentage of latent information is disseminated over iterations on the horizontal axis. And then here you see the actually the eigenvalue, the second largest eigenvalue of the adjacency matrix in the icosahedral graph. And here you roughly see after 3 iterations, here it's indicated with 90%, but actually more precisely it's the 91.1% that I was referring to. But that's without critics. On the right-hand side, Asad Jalali in surplus 1 of the book went further and used Markov chains. And this is actually the figure 1.4 shows the probability of information transfer at different distances between nodes. And so the node itself, and the self loop, distant delta 0, 1, so the adjacent nodes, the probability of information transfer. 3, 2, next but nearest neighbor, which would be a critic. And then the third one is the polar opposite node. And what I've actually, and although this is a continuous model, what I actually did is use the Markov chain eigenvalues to compute the convergence rate. So it's more similar, I would say, it's both, let's say, combining what Stafford proposed and what Jalali proposed. And I think it's a rather intuitive way of looking at the performance of icosahedral space. So in matrix form, and again, I have to look for the laser. Here I take this similar steps as what Jalali describes in surplus 1. He speaks about the adjacency matrix for the pentagonal graph. And so that's basically the pentagon cap, which we just saw visualizes where the critics are positioned. And this is a 5 by 5 matrix, which basically says that pentagon or pentagon, which node is connected to the other one, and what is the weight given to it. Because before it was, I don't know if it's visible for you on screen, but in pencil I've added the original matrices. Those are only consisting of zeros and ones. So if you are adjacent to me, then you are a 1. If not, then you're a 0. Here I've added the critics in matrix A, C, subscript C and B, which then uses, if you are a critic, you are a 1 weighted connection or an edge. And if you're a member, an adjacent member of a certain node, you get the weight G, the golden ratio, which frequently returns in beyond dispute. And actually, to be honest, my first conjecture was, let's give the members double the weight of a critic in the protocol. But thinking about it later on and looking at first results, I came to the conclusion that the golden ratio, 1.618 approximately, approaches that, maybe even more, although for the results here it doesn't really matter. But that's what I used. Then if you go on in the middle, you get the matrix, the adjacency matrix updated or weighted MC with critics, which is shorthand notation, but that's a 12 by 12 matrix, which basically says now in the entire icosahedral graph, where are the critics, where are the members, where are the polar opposites, and what weight do they get? Is it polar opposite weight 0? As usual, are you a critic, weight 1? And if you're a member, it's the golden ratio. Then the double stochastic matrix, so basically the Markov model, which represents, and that's again a 12 by 12 matrix, of which I will show you a few instances on the next slide, which denotes the one-step transition probability. So what is again the probability of transferring information from after an iteration in this case. Well, this expression I will not explain exactly, but here again, it's related to the golden ratio. And again, hopefully, again, you can see that on the upper right-hand corner in this slide, you see the original icosahedral graph as was presented in Beyond Dispute, the planar form of it. And here I've updated that with the critic internal braces, which is the cyan colored relations or connections. And so the original model was basically the magenta lines or connections, and here you also have the cyan internal critic connections added to it. Another way of looking at it, compare and contrast. On the left-hand side, you see the, let's say, the original Markov chain, which was not in that way shown in Beyond Dispute, but that is the Markov chain if you would not include the critics. Whereas on the right-hand side, again, you see two different colors, where you both have the member connections and the critic connections with different weights, hence different transition probabilities for information transfer. So here you can really visually see the model, which is basically used to calculate the updated convergence rate with critics. Now, why I use Markov chains and how it works. And let me just show it again in matrix form, but then also with the heat map, which maybe makes it a bit more intuitive to grasp. If we start on the upper left-hand corner, at the start of this integration, here you have the Markov transition matrix, 12 by 12, and on the diagonal, the main diagonal, you have basically the node itself. So the self loop, top node number 1, or red, or white, or purple, or the colors are quite familiar, onto itself. So basically, we could say conceptually, all information is stored in the topic, and it still has to be conversed out and dispersed out and reverberated out into the infosec. After one iteration, we basically have the Markov matrix that I just on the previous slide showed in equation form, whereas the green cells or connections, edges, struts, show the transition probability of a member to a member. So that's approximately 11% in, let's say, the ideal double stochastic, very symmetric form of the model. If we proceed on the first row, so if we say that the first topic, it interacts with all the other, except for its polar opposite, after one iteration, what's the probability of transferring information via critic edge? Well, that's about 6.8%. And so here you basically see where are the members and where are the critics, and where are the polar opposites, which is a 0 or red cell. By the way, both rows and columns in a Markov model sum to 1. It's a probabilistic model. Now, if you square that matrix, so we go to the upper right-hand corner, if you say after 2 iterations, we basically have the 2-step probability, transition probability of transferring information. So I basically said multiply P1 with itself. So let's square it. Well, then you already start getting slightly different distributions across the model, different transition probabilities. And as you do that again, you multiply it with the 1-step transition probabilities. You get after 3 iterations, and in a double stochastic and nicely symmetric form, if you keep doing this, it will converge to its steady state, or its stationary distribution, which is the probability of transferring information to any of the 12 topics is 1/12. So 1/12 for each topic, which is approximately 0.83 or something. You can use your calculator to do that. But we're not there exactly yet, and not 100%, but close. Okay, so that is basically the model. Now, of these matrices, you can compute eigenvalues. That's a rather trivial linear algebra operation, but you can do that. Now, what I added on top of that is add some uncertainty. So again, I first have to look at my laser. Where is my laser? So here again, we have the one-step transition probability matrix, and if which we just saw, and if you compute the second largest eigenvalue, here denoted as lambda 2, that is the parameter that expresses the convergence rate of the model. And the lower, the better, basically. Well, okay, 0.239. Well, but is it always that neat? Is it always that orderly? Probably not, from one to another integration and from one iteration to another. So what I did is I used Monte Carlo simulation. And here you basically see on the lower left-hand corner a empty transition matrix where I just fixed the polar opposites at 0 for one-step transition probability. And I basically randomized all other connections, all other edges. So it basically did random draws for 1,000 iterations for each of these cells, and always sticking to the requirement that at least the rows have to sum to 1. And it has to be a stochastic matrix. On the right-hand side, you see two instances of that, two extreme ones. The upper one, with the eigenvalue 0.15, is a very fast converging form. It's not symmetric anymore, because you see that the columns are not neatly summing to 1 anymore. The rows are, but the columns not anymore. But this is a very fast model. So I will, at the end, briefly come back to that. And on the right hand, on the lower side, you have a very slow one, and in relative terms. So it has an eigenvalue of 0.33. And these are the two extremes. Now I did 1,000 draws, 1,000 samples. And here this is basically the same plot, but let's take the probability distribution, density distribution. If you would have done this without critics, so basically a revisiting of the model in beyond dispute without critics, you would get the red curve here, if you would do that 1,000 times. With critics, it's the eigenvalues, the second largest eigenvalue is much lower, significantly lower. They do not even touch these two models. So it's with this variability or uncertainty in the model that I've calculated and what is the best, the worst, and the nominal case of convergence after 3 iterations. Now, just small revisiting also of the importance of the second largest eigenvalue and then the absolute or the modulus of it. A Markov chain always has its largest eigenvalue is unity, 1, and we take the second largest one and its absolute value, which you can go back in the early 20th century by Perron and Frobenius in Germany, who found relations on why that expresses the convergence rate of a Markov chain. Here, I've denoted it with R to stay a bit in the tradition of information theory and cybernetics. You might say, why not C? Well, R was typically used to speak about either convergence or redundancy, which I think is equivalent to what we're speaking about here. But let that be, let R be the convergence, let N be the number of iterations in this integration, and let the second largest eigenvalue modulus, lambda 2, to the power of N, let that be the relative entropy across iterations. So then the convergence between 0 and 1 is defined by 1 minus the relative entropy, and where always the second largest eigenvalue is also the absolute value is also between 0 and 1, and obviously your number of iterations has to be equal or higher than 0. As I already alluded to, a lower eigenvalue indicates faster convergence. So you could actually even find new forms of integration, Gibbs integrity, and optimize for convergence, which I think is an interesting idea. And that's why I said let's use R to denote convergence, because it is equivalent to redundancy as defined by Claude Shannon and Ron Foster and Gordon Pask, where they use it in terms of 1 minus the relative entropy expressed as the actual entropy over the maximum entropy in the system, or the variety over the maximum variety in the system, where the rate, so the convergence rate, has to be non-negative, has to be larger than 0, which is a necessary condition for a self-organizing system. Here I would just like to add that I think that convergence is analogous to reverberation, and that's the main term used in Beyond Dispute and in the context of Gibbs integrity, but also analogous to redundancy of potential command or particle magnetic and heat diffusion in physics. Now to the graphs. Updated graph, inverted. So I think this is also a bit more intuitive to read if we're speaking about how does it perform, its integration, over iterations. Now, the solid lines, the 3 solid lines is basically, the green line is the best case in the new convergence model, adding critics over 1,000 samples. The black line is the mean or the average performance, and the solid red line is the worst case or the lower limit performance, again based on these random samples. The dashed lines are exactly the same, but then for the original model in Beyond Dispute without the critics. So here we see, follow basically the black line, the solid line. After 3 iterations, the convergence is, as I said in the abstract in the beginning, 98.9%. If you recalculate with this Markov model without critics, it would have been 77.4% on average. So taking that delta, you could say that the critics add 21.5% in nominal performance after 3 iterations. Now, that is already in itself quite significant and interesting to know, because you might also say, if they don't add much, why make the protocol complicated if it's not necessary? Well, here I would say I would stick with them. Also, because look at the uncertainty in the performance of the updated model. The range is much smaller. Actually, the uncertainty is reduced by around 90%. So only the increase in nominal performance of the critics is impressive, but even more so, it makes the model much more reliable. So I think here the conclusion is better stick with critics. This is a similar graph, but then comparing it to basically what was in the book, let's say. Again, the 3 solid lines, and then let's look at the lower magenta line. That is slightly differently presented, but basically what Stafford proposed in chapter 13, which is then after 3 iterations, you would have had, using the adjacency matrix, 91.1% convergence. So actually, with critics, it's 7.8% higher. I've also tested if I would use the updated model with the adjacency matrix, so the cyan colored dashed model, which is about in between, but I didn't find a sensible way to simulate the uncertainty. So I prefer to stick with the Markov model over the adjacency matrices. But here the insight or outcome is it was actually intended 7.8% higher than in the book. And here the last graph, similar one, is if you look at the range, so the uncertainty, and you look at a big because it's basically doing random draws in these matrices. What is the most approximate weight for a team member versus a critic? Well, here again, you see the black dashed line, which approaches very closely the mean value, when you use the golden ratio as the weight for a member. So here I would also say let's stick with G 1.618. And I also did some 2 other scenarios. Are critics of the same weight or same importance as team members? So is it a one-on-one relation? Well, then it would be the cyan dashed line here, which goes out of my Six Sigma level. So the probability of that happening is 0.15% approximately. So I would say, I don't think it's very probable that they are really of equal weight, which doesn't say they don't matter. So that's outside of the range. And the same holds for a 4-to-1 ratio, where if you look at the schedule or the protocol, you could say time allocation wise, a team member has 4 times more time allocated to him or her compared to a critic. If you would use that ratio, you would get the cyan colored dashed line here, which is also outside of the range. So that's also highly improbable. So I would say here, the conclusion is G golden ratio is also here a very attractive proposition. Then just to come back to asymmetric forms, so let's say the more extreme forms, but in this case, an asymmetric chain, which performs even 1% better compared to the nice symmetric form, mean, average, nominal performance. So we saw the matrix form of that, with the eigenvalue 0.15, which is somewhat lower than 0.239. And here you see, would be interesting. I don't know if it's really worthwhile necessarily in icosahedral integration to look at how you could optimize for that. But it basically means, also if you look at the matrix form, if you could sort of tweak and influence it somewhat, or to find the pump, I would say, or jack it up, then you could actually even go faster. But it's 1% after 3 iterations, so it's maybe not that well, which is, oh, by the way, in this the updated model, also due to the fact that it's very reliable. You have the uncertainty goes down significantly after 3 iterations, which what we're looking at. If you wouldn't have the critics, probably it would make much more difference. So conclusions. Icosahedral integration with critics converges 7.8% faster than estimated and beyond dispute. And if you look a bit with from a wider angle to the plot, you could actually say that you add one iteration in practice. And so you go from 91.9 to 98.9. If you accept Markov chains as a more accurate model to estimate the convergence, the critics add 21.5% performance after 3 iterations. And then the main question here is, can we test that? As again, I think, given the fact that the protocol is quite strict, that the models are quite transparent, that you can calculate quite a lot, could we empirically test and validate this? Could we use maybe conversation theory as developed by Gordon Pask? And so a conversational method to test if it actually is the case, if the mathematics play out in practice. I guess we have enough practitioners and developers of integration and Teams integrity on the line here. So I guess we can all say, yeah, probably it works quite well after 3 iterations. And from the second to the 3rd iteration, definitely something happens. But my engineering attitude says, can we test it? Or even the last bullet, could you, in a, let's say, Fitbit wrist type of feature, could you self-diagnose it built in the protocol? So every futures integration that would be done, either physically, online, or synchronous or asynchronous formats, could you build it into the protocol that you could actually diagnose and calculate the convergence of one individual instance of this integration? So I think it's time to fuse Teams integrity and conversation theory. And with that, I think I will hand it over to all of you with questions and discussions. If not, I would have one, let's say, first convenient experimental setup on how it could be tested. And maybe this would be an interesting experiment in the eSyn group or anyone else here interested in exploring this type of empirical analysis. But let's leave this on screen and maybe open up the floor for some questions or comments.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. Really interesting and challenging all the research that you have done. So I guess there are some people that are making comments here. So who would like to start with the questions and comments? Mm-hmm.
I can ask a layman question, if I may.
Sure.
We have talked about 2 roles, the team and the critic. What about the people floating?
The observer role.
Yeah.
In preparation to this webinar, Konstantin Malik asked this exactly same question. Would you consider the observer role? And I would say implicitly yes, because they were basically already in the existing model.
Yeah.
Observers don't have let's say, a dedicated internal connection in the icosahedron.
My question comes from another question. When you said tweaking, what do you mean, right? So what does it actually mean to make it faster? And I was thinking maybe a little bit more interconnectivity, but then I'm with the observer because he's actually adding some spicy ingredient to the whole thing, right? That's a magic. The observer is like the topping.
Yeah, exactly. I would. Yeah, you might look at it in that direction. If you want to do this in practice, how could you sort of tweak it and kickstart this integration in a slightly asymmetric way. You would also, looking at different personalities in an info set, it will probably never be really symmetric.
Exactly. That's what I thought. You change the info set, then you are tweaking, right? You have opinion leaders there or not, or you have power players there or not. And depending on what people you have in the info set, you have.
By the way, Jens, another way of looking at it, as I said, it's an interesting, maybe mathematical reflection. But it's not that if you look at the updated model, that it makes really orders of magnitude difference. So you might say that that is already occurring in practice, probably.
Yeah, that's a little bit my my spontaneous gut feeling.
Yeah, mine too.
Interesting. Thank you.
I think that Marta is asking, wanting to ask a question. Marta?
Yes, hello. I don't see, sorry. Yes, I'm Marta Giraldo. I am based in Bogota, Colombia. I'm very close friend to Angela and John and some more people here. But really, I'm in the side of the grass of the organizations trying to find a way of really getting together. This is a project which is called Minganet, a network to life care. And so this is, I'm not going to really get in profound into this, because my proposal is we're looking really to have the conversations to make this a project of all, from all to all, in order to find what we should be, this kind of governance, a world governance idea, which is we have it here that it's here in Colombia. We're trying to do that, but if we don't do it with Latin America, we are still spreading, being scattered, and so we really have to connect these conversations. And I participated of this integration that I was like 1994, I think, which is this World's Integrity Project.
Okay.
I went to look for the information right now, and I have all the notes of what these countries decided on each of the 12 subjects. This is an information that I think it's like the opportunity now that you, Mike, is looking for where to try this. I've participated with Angel and John like in 4 or 5 integrations, like monitoring and helping them. And I really think that this is the opportunity to really use this helping with your research and trying to do something. If you think locally, we are really ready for that. I would say that I don't know the language, how to manage it, but we're looking for that. And I'm sorry, Kate is not here, which is part of this Metaforum group also, because we've been looking of really how to work on this integration and find the resources for that. And there are possibilities here in my country, because we are on a new social government, which is opening for really social possibilities. So we might try to find the resources here for really getting a project like this. So I'm sorry, because I don't know, I would never have the opportunity to talk about this, and so I think here are the persons that are interested in this integration and all these powerful possibilities enhanced with these new approaches of Mike. So I just leave it like there. I don't know if we could on the Slack to continue talking of that, or Metaforum would kind of help in just getting to know if there's would be interested of the Metaforum group and all these persons connected to it to move into something like that, into having a new world project conversation around. And what we're looking here is how to get together to really with life in the center, to care life. How to get organized for that. That would be a question. I put it there, but if you really think there will be some other thing connected like that, but we would like to really to move on to that with all these amazing tools. Thank you so much.
Great to hear about your ambition, Marta. So from my side, also for you, for anyone at Metaforum, these modest first results are available to all. And my idea was to give a performance rating, up to date, 2022, of the actual protocol as it has been delivered already over 2 decades. And so just a bit, this is a silly example analogy, but the same as you would go to buy a new laptop or computer, you would like to know the random access memory, and so the performance rating of a device you would buy. And if you're heading into ambitious projects as world's integrity, I think this is a nice feature to also get across. I don't think there are many, if there are similar methodologies to integration and Teams integrity, that can actually show this to you when pitching the protocol. And then, of course, the next question would be, do we have empirical evidence to support that? And I think that is just a modest contribution in the sense of, I think we would have to get that straight and across.
So, thank you, Mike and Marta. I'll comment by the end on some of Marta's proposals, but let's listen to Peter, who's been waiting with a question.
Yes, thank you very much for that presentation. And having been involved in the ESIN and understanding the statistical and modeling approach you've taken to this analysis, a piece of research would be interesting to make a deeper understanding of the relation between adjacency matrices and Markov chains. But so that would be sort of something I'd be interested in, particularly as it relates to the way that adjacency matrices are used in the strategic dialogic design process that John Warfield and Aleko Christakis have developed. So that's sort of like a research possibility.
I was not aware of that, Peter. So.
Well, it would be interesting to pursue that as one of your research levels, and I would like to explore that with you, because the openness of these algorithms, I think, are crucial. The question I have, which is, is there's people in this process. And so while struts and mechanical configurations can offer a statistical probability of the results that you identify, how can we validate or show with evidence, as you rightly ask, I think, that this has an effect? I mean, you could have people who have a critic role, for want of a better term, that don't say anything. Or you could have participants in the meeting that don't say anything. So, I mean, so that research question is interesting, is how do you put a measurement, if you like, on the information?
No, by the way, it was between brackets. Information transfer can also be you trigger me, I trigger you, and whatever happens then.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just looking at you could be an information trigger, right? I mean, there's these multiple dimensions of information transfer, which would be, I mean, just being in the same physical room is different than being in the same electronic room because of our own physical energy systems interacting, which is another information exchange and another level. So, making the comparison between an in-person integration in a physical room and the ESIN that we did would be another research topic that would be quite fascinating in terms of information. So how do we measure information, I guess, in the real world? And could we go back to eSyn? We've got all the recordings. I mean, what would it take? Transcribing them all and then building some kind of relational map? How would you propose to sort of build the evidence to build off of your propositions here?
Well, this was on screen. That's one first convenient setup. If you would do it with arrays of random numbers. So you would rerun sort of a short form of an eSyn experiment as you did. And you would just present 12 different random number arrays with 30 random numbers at each topic or node. And you would, of course, have the role differentiation in place, so members, critics, and observers, etc. And then you could do something with strict time limitations, etc. And you would then check after each iteration, can each topic team reproduce the array of random numbers. That's really, but I'm aware of the limitations. I hope no one has ever done that in practice in a real integration and has paid for that. But that would be one option to look if you could reproduce those numbers. But obviously that's not the same kind of setting as what you have in the real integration. So the question is, what would be a representative way of testing this?
Well, that's to be answered.
And what you're alluding to is basically different scenarios. It's indeed interesting. Is an online eSyn protocol converging this at the same rate as a physical presence one or not? Or doesn't it matter? Or is one better than the other? Interesting.
Thank you.
Mark has a question.
Mike, I've never met you. I enjoyed your talk a lot. I'm going to summarize it at less than a layman's level. What you've just done for me is validated that Beer was right and that the roles matter and that 3 rounds is amazing and 2 is less and 1 is less. So thank you very much. Now I just want to put into the group. The other thing is I do want to talk to you personally sometime about how you're using Stafford's ratio measures, because we have an opportunity, Carrie and I have an opportunity to start using that now. So if you ever have time to chat about that, you mentioned it in your intro. So, you know, I too, like most of the people here, were in the eSyn integration, so was Carrie. I shouldn't say this, but that was one of the most important meetings of my life. Not for why you would think, but because I got drunk at the bar. Thank you, Peter. And Carrie and I became amorous and now we're partners. So thank you for that. But that's neither here nor there. The thing I came out of that meeting with was, you know, we took a syntegration and just because of the necessity of doing it online, we drug it out to 5 days instead of 2 or 3 days. And my question to everyone that was in my teams at that time was, why don't we envision something I would call persistent or slow syntegrations? And that's what I'm up to. By any name, I don't care what they're called. These are just understandings about how human beings are together. Our work, Carrie's and mine, is mostly in neighborhoods. And I use the metaphor, which, you know, I don't know if Beer would like it, probably no one here will, of campfire conversations and cave drawings. So without drawings, without system drawings, I think all the conversations sort of die over time. You really need something you can point at and talk about. So for me, the meta outcome of a syntegration, slow or fast, should be diagrams. And they need to lead to action. And that's my whole deal is, if, you know, some of you may know, you know, I'm a doctor, an ER doc. And I like to see things happen. I don't like people dying in my emergency room. So thinking is great, but action is better. And so I want syntegration to turn into action. That's what Carrie and I are doing, working with neighborhoods. So here maybe is where Flores and Beer get back together, because Flores's conversations for actions, I think, is critical, but conversations for actions that aren't informed with the context of complex systems through some kind of process like syntegration also lead to stupid actions. So I see this great opportunity, and I was in healthcare, leader in America for innovating in healthcare back in the 90s, in the first decade of this century. And I quit that entirely because it's a predatory system. And the stronger it gets, the worse it is for the society. But health is in the neighborhood. So that's where we've shifted our efforts. And that's where conversation is felt to be useful. It's not a cost on the ledger to say, oh, we have to have these goddamn meetings so we can get the labor back to work making money for us. Conversations are what neighborhoods like. So I think these wonderful tools that that Beer and a lot of you have continued to develop on, our job, Carrie's and mine, is to adapt them by any name into the life of neighborhoods. So thank you for validating mathematically that Beer was right.
You're welcome. Well, Mark, to respond, in specific in relation to this integration protocol, from my first interaction with it. By the way, I was mentored by Jan Kuiper in the Netherlands, who was one of the early integration developers in the 90s. So we collaborated with their company, Ecodrone, in the Netherlands. Just some historical background, maybe that doesn't mean anything to you. But my point is, from that moment on, I've always, I guess in the beginning implicit, but nowadays more explicit, I've always asked myself the question, what is the conserved quantity in conversation that I think should be facilitated in this integration? And if, as you say, action, interactions of actors for actions is the aim, what should be conserved? If you look at the facilitation process also as integration, I think that past conversation theory gives us quite some wisdom and guidance in that direction.
Well, I'd love to continue this because it's very germane to the work Carrie and I are doing in Arizona and Oregon. And anything we would learn from you, we would put into practice.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, thank you a lot. And it's I don't get here often, but it's always inspiring when I do.
Well, I don't see more questions. There have been some interesting comments. Vanilla was saying, well, Jens has some comments. I don't know, Jens, you want to make your comments about the sociocracy?
Sorry, I have Angela.
Yeah, Joe.
Oh. Joe, yes, of course. Go on.
Yeah, may I?
Yes.
Yeah, Mike, I have a few questions more to do with the pure research side of what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And the first one is that Jalali took his analysis graph set theory down to what he considered to be the next figure that would have similar kinds of information dissemination. And he established that it was a 10 nodal form.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Remember that? Right.
Yeah.
So Stafford and I worked on that. And the only 10 nodal polyhedral form that we could come up with was a cube. So you've got 8 of the nodes. And then on 2 sides of the cube, opposite to each other, you basically stellate with 4 to bring it to 2.
Yeah.
And so what this did, it did 2 things. It brought polar opposites into both 2 away from and 3 away from positions, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there was no form like that was regular. So we kind of said, let's not look at that. But that's one as well. The cube octahedron, are you familiar with? Buckminster-Fuller's vector equilibrium?
Yeah.
Flexor? Right. So in deconstructing the ICOSA down into the smaller forms, we use the cube octahedron as the way of deconstructing. And to do that, you remove one orthogonal set of 6 polar opposites. And so what you have is still the 12 nodes, but now you have 24 players that are connected forward to a node, same critical relationship, everything. I wondered if modeling the cube octahedron and Jalali's 10 person would provide complementary information to the ICOSA in terms of the ranges of information flow. applying the same logic to the cube octahedron, there should be less information flow. You have 6 members less, but the same nodal distribution. So that was a question about whether or not you had looked at an analysis of the smaller form, but particularly the cube octahedron, which in many other realms, including cosmology, is turning out to be fundamental as one of nature's structures. So that was number one. Number two was the discovery of the Enneagram in the icosahedron led us to a place where if we took one strut of the 30 struts of the icosahedron, every one of those struts is connected to an oscillating Enneagram on 2 sides. So there are 60 Enneagrams in the icosahedron, and Stafford and I thought that this had to have something to do with the internal dynamic strength, the internal dynamics of that model. Yeah. So again, the last part that will lead me to is something that has not been written in Beyond Dispute, but I've been working on since then, is the concept of resonance.
Mm-hmm.
So if we kind of simplify the language, if I say something to you, that's a direct message. If you repeat it to me, that's an echo. That's not reverberation. Reverberation occurs when it's transformed in your nervous system to something that sounds like or you add to, and then that reverberation is what we counted. Now, after every iteration, the 12 nodes come alive. You have the statement, you have all the meetings and the gathering. And after 3 iterations of that, we believe there is resonance that gets set up between the 12 nodes directly. Is there any possible way of measuring that kind of an influence? So after each iteration, the resonance in the 12 nodes becomes more and more powerful as all 12 of the meetings are completed. And the final comment in terms of applying it to testing it is to get right down to deconstructing everything to words. There's enough AI now to do searches that if you actually recorded a disintegration or a process of disintegration, you could do a Wordle, count all the words, put together the smallest sentences, build them into paragraphs, and actually by following the participants, see how information is growing in terms of a seed. I thought that might also be an interesting way of tracking how information is being disseminated in the info set.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, 3 interesting options. Well, my answer to the first one is no, I have not done any other forms, but the models are applicable to any matrix, so any graph. So it can be done. I would, anyhow, I think that should be a design feature if you want to further customize Syntegra forms. I would say test any graph. If it works, go with it. So as you're also saying, Jalali's 10 form, does it work? Does it converge? Smaller info set, but does it converge as fast as an icosahedral one? Or is that not necessary? And so the mathematics don't care. You could do it for any form. The resonance part, I don't have a direct answer to, but an interesting one. You saw me make some equivalencies with redundancy and information theory and some analogies with other concepts, either in physics or other domains. I didn't mention resonance, but it would be one way of looking at it to make it observable, what is occurring over iterations, or perhaps and that's maybe also a little bit related to what Mark Pearson earlier said. If you would do a persistent form of Teams integrity protocol, would it be useful to look in continuous time instead of discrete time? So instead of over iterations, continuous time. That would be another option. Jalali also, the graph I showed you in the beginning from Jalali was actually a continuous time model. So is that, I think the standard disintegration form, I don't think it's terribly relevant, but in other forms it might be. And then the last one, transcript of an outcome result, of all the outcome results, and doing text analysis on that might be a way to that is something you could do basically on a continuous basis for each instance of integration. And see if it actually, then you actually as a client would know after 3 iterations, an algorithm would tell you, yes, exactly, you're within range, you have converged. That's a little bit tongue in cheek, but it wouldn't be unimaginable.
Thank you.
There is another question from Peter.
Yeah, I think this is all absolutely wonderful and fascinating. And Mike, I would really encourage you to think about possibly having a monthly research meeting of this group to develop, because we're on the verge of sort of developing, I think, you know, where Stafford's work could go profoundly. So what came to mind while Joe was talking, firstly, there's sort of the information and then response, which is, I think, an important, or the echo piece, which I think is important to put some kind of measure on. I'm not quite sure how, but I mean, in music terms, there's obviously, particularly in jazz, you get, you know, jazz comes to mind, you get this sort of improv kind of experience. So then Joe mentioned the term resonance, and given that we're all information sort of vibrating entities, I mean, life is a series of vibrations, and music plays such an important part, you know, with our heartbeats and coming from the heart, and Stafford's work, you know, starting with the heart, and the vibrations that the heart creates with information, you know, to explore how different numbers of people or struts or different structures, which we've sort of said, you know, well, if I don't have 30 people, what do I do? You know, or I've only got 24, or I've got 60 people. The relative mathematical results of modeling at different numbers with different structures, like Joe was proposing, would be really helpful to say, well, if you've got 24, you do this, or you've got 12, you do this, and the implications of it are this. But from a sort of a, you know, and looking at the musical piece of this, because we're all musical people. I mean, you know, my voice is a form of music. So the vibe, anyway, there's just so many different tangents and things that are mutually convergent, I think, on this, that it's an exciting potential to sort of look at the whole mathematical, statistical reinforcement of the musical relation of the interaction of the people at different levels of numerical association, if I can put it that way, that just fascinates me.
Peter, you've already operationalized the Fitbit idea. If everyone would wear a Fitbit and you would measure heart rate variability, your hypothesis would be that everyone is in sync after 3 iterations.
Well, exactly. And 3 is the basic level of structure, you know, if you think about it. And Peirce talked about 3. So, I mean, 3's come up a lot in life. And so, you know, if consciousness, which was in the chat, I think somebody talked about consciousness here, or maybe it was at Ian's, raising consciousness through music, you know, and being together. I mean, that's the emotional kind of experience to some extent that people were expressing at the end of the integration. It was an emotional experience for many. At different, well, it's probably emotional for all of us, but at different levels of consciousness raising, which therefore creates its own really interesting reflective position. Anyway, I could go on about that. I'll stop. Thank you.
Okay, we have Mark.
I was just listening to this. I was just wondering where you all collectively, it's not just for Mike, where you all collectively think integration. See, a lot of this has been put forward, not all of it, a lot of it in the context of businesses, which in a way have to move fast and narrow, and I think have unintended consequences. And neighborhoods and families can afford to move slower. And so that's just in preface to saying, where do you connect all this to stories? I think we live in stories. The stories may be quite truncated in a business, but in life, in our homes, in our neighborhoods, and with a lot of people in this group that I know, we live in stories. We have narratives we could tell. And I think, and I could be wrong on this, but I think stories are the way we understand the world emotionally. And I think emotions are the way in which we have the courage to take actions. I think emotion and motive have a similar root. And if we're going to get to actions that are good for the tribe, for the community, for the family, etc., shouldn't we be at least having some sub-narrative about how Syntegration creates new stories and not just kind of leave it at the side, but I think the stories are the actual output.
Mike,
That's
are you gonna want to respond to Mark, or shall we go into the next question?
I will, I value the contribution and I'm thinking about it. So that's a good sign, right?
Okay,
But
because
if anyone else wants to respond to that, be welcome. Or...
we have one more question from John Waters. What do you think about that one?
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I
just very
think
quickly,
if you just stop sharing the video, and so we can, yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
sorry, I asked in the chat a couple of times where this is written down, but so I can read it rather than watch the playback. I haven't had an answer yet. Can I read it?
Yes,
Are you happy to share your presentation, Mike?
Yeah.
If you put
Thank
it if you send it to me, I will put it in the Metaforum website, in the eScene webpage.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, by the way, that does link to my other point in the beginning on Slack. And so Metaforum basically has a workspace in the Slack application that is working. You might, anyone in the eScene info set I saw on Metaforum has an account there, but you might not be aware of it. Some were not aware of that. So you might have been added during the eScene project. But anyway, you're there with one of your email addresses. We can join. There's a channel open called hashtag icosahedral graph. And for example, I could also share the presentation there instead of using email, because not everyone is on Angela's mail list for the eScene. I've also invited some other friends and colleagues, but basically anyone could be on the Metaforum Slack space.
That's where I was looking, but I can't find more.
No, but I haven't uploaded it yet.
Right.
I just had it opened up with the abstract that you saw in this presentation, and at the request of another colleague here, Mark, I shared some of the equations used in the model, but not the integral presentation. But that can be uploaded there.
So Mike, if you send if you reply to the whole list of participants with the link to the Slack, then people can start continuing the conversation with you. Yep. Yeah. And sharing the slides. I just want to say that I was very happy with Mike's suggestion. It was his suggestion. He's been doing this research, and he gave us the opportunity to get together in the eScene info set, and with other people that are here that were interested in the conversation. And some of us have been meeting in the background and trying to think about a new version of the Metaforum 2, that will be, let's say, hopefully more active both in developing its integration and developing the VSM. And some people want to even consider the possibility of some of us doing coaching for eScene or for integration, or doing VSM teaching online. So we are exploring all these possibilities, and we will be informing. But for the time being, I am very happy that this info set is beginning to be active again, and very thankful with Mike to taking the lead. And so hopefully this will be a good excuse to continue conversation about the eScene and about integration, and about doing more research on integration. So anyway, I don't know if anyone has more questions, but if not, thank you very much, Mike.
And thank you very much, Agatha, as well, for organizing this. This is Jan. I'm here.
Thank
But
you. Dan.
I had to pop in later. That's so happy for the recording stuff. That's great.
You can watch the replay, sir. Excellence.
Yeah, I will. Thanks.
I'd love an encore performance on the measurement piece. I think we really cause a lot of grief in organizations and in the world with inadequate measures. And I think Beer was onto something, but I'm not clever enough to know how to translate it into action. But we could do that with a little bit of help.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
And, no, Angela, I would just like to know if my proposal is a really something that can be considered, and how to maybe who can I continue this conversation if there's some interest.
Well, I think that for the time being, it will be good to restart the conversations in Slack, and then maybe some people, you will find more people that is interested and will join you. And our idea is to get better organized next year around both developments in integration and developments in BSM. So we will let you know whatever is the channels that we will be opening, but for the time being, we can start with Mike and this Slack channel and carrying on, yeah, and to start seeing what other proposals are around and who is interested in working more on these ideas, yeah.
Okay. Good.
So anyway, thank you very much. Lovely to see you. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to everyone.
Yes. My season's greetings to all of you, wherever you are.
And see you, some of you very soon, some of others in January.
Okay, let's keep in touch.
Okay.
Be well, be well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
You can stop the recording.
Bye-bye.